Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the February 2022 edition of Socialism for All. And it's an audiobook and discussion of Decree on the Land from the Second All-Russian Congress of Soviets, 1917, credited to Lenin. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. You can find a link to Patreon in the video description. So the last video that we put up on the channel was Marx's The Nationalization of the Land from 1872, talking about the importance of, well, nationalizing the land. It's pretty much in the name. Marx said that the property in the soil is the original source of all wealth. Labor may be the source of value, but the property in the soil is the original source. And he called this the great problem upon the solution of which depends the future of the working class. He also said that the nationalization of land will work a complete change in the relations between labor and capital, and finally do away with the capitalist form of production, whether industrial or rural. Then, class distinctions and privileges will disappear, together with the economical basis upon which they rest, and eventually there will no longer be any government or state power distinct from society itself. In other words, society itself would become the government or state power. So anyway, you can hear that full text if you like. It's up on the channel now. This file is the Decree on the Land from November 8, 1917 in Soviet Russia. This is just after the October Revolution, when the communists took power. Brief recap: the first Russian Revolution against the Tsar was 1905. It got some reforms but didn't get the Tsar out. Then in 1917, February, and this was several years into World War I, there was another revolution, the February Revolution, which actually did succeed at ousting the Tsar. So it was assumed at this point that the bourgeoisie was going to just start setting up a capitalist republic, and that would be that. And there was a provisional government along those lines. However, the communists persisted, and they pushed through, and just later that very year, in October, they had another revolution, basically ousting the bourgeoisie and their provisional government. Again, World War I laid the basis for a lot of this, because society was already in a state of upheaval and conflict, and the socialists just basically went for it and got it. So this is one of the first things that they did in November of 1917. So without further introduction, let's get into the decree itself. There are a number of enumerated points, and you can see how important the nationalization of the land was to them. 1. Landlord ownership of land is abolished forthwith without any compensation. Quick comment there. When they say landlord, we're not just talking about somebody that owns an apartment complex. We mean lord more in the sort of old feudal sense. I mean, certain aspects of feudalism had been legislated away by this point, but we're talking more about people that controlled huge amounts of land that peasants lived on and did farming and etc. So this was really power that needed to be broken. Anyway, continuing. 2. The landed estates, as also all crown, monastery, and church lands, with all their livestock, implements, buildings, and everything pertaining thereto, shall be placed at the disposal of the Volost land committees and the Uyezd Soviets of Peasants' Deputies, pending the convocation of the Constituent Assembly. 3. All damage to confiscated property, which henceforth belongs to the whole people, is proclaimed a grave crime, to be published by the revolutionary courts. The Uyezd Soviets of Peasants' Deputies shall take all necessary measures to assure the observance of the strict order during the confiscation of the landed estates, to determine the size of the estates, and the particular estates subject to confiscation, to draw up exact inventories of all property confiscated, and to protect, in a strict revolutionary way, all agricultural enterprises transferred to the people, with all buildings, implements, livestock, produce stocks, etc. So comment there. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but basically the revolutionary government didn't want the outgoing private property owners destroying their stuff before the people got a chance to use it. This phenomenon would be a problem at later points during the collectivization process. Continuing. 4. The following peasant mandate, compiled by the Izvestia of the All-Russian Soviet of Peasants' Deputies from 242 local peasant mandates, and published in number 88 of the Izvestia, shall serve everywhere to guide the implementation of the great land reforms until a final decision on the latter is taken by the Constituent Assembly. 5. The land of ordinary peasants and ordinary Cossacks shall not be confiscated. Comment, this is basically the "we're not coming for your toothbrush" clause. Basically, the measures up to this point are concerned with breaking the power of the old nobility and other, massive landowners that basically held the mostly agrarian economy under its control, and obviously that's not the basis for building socialism. So that had to be nationalized. At the same time, the alliance that won the Russian Revolution was the hammer and sickle. It was the alliance of the hammer, the urban proletariat, and the sickle, the rural peasantry. The proletariat was the leading class in that revolutionary alliance, but the peasantry was there and existed because that was the state of Russia's development at that time. So the peasantry had demands, and the socialists, while centering the proletariat, also wanted to make sure that the peasantry was taken care of in the post-revolution order. However, it's important to note that the peasantry is not a monolith. There are different classes of peasants. There are poor peasants, middle peasants, rich peasants. Hence, I think, the qualifier of ordinary peasants. Anyway, continuing, peasant mandate on the land. The land question in its full scope can be settled only by the popular Constituent Assembly. The most equitable settlement of the land question is to be as follows. 1. Private ownership of land shall be abolished forever. Land shall not be sold, purchased, leased, mortgaged, or otherwise alienated. All land, whether state, appanage, that's land given by a king to a prince, crown, monastery, church, factory, primogeniture, that's land that passes from a father to his first son, private, public, peasant, etc., shall be alienated without compensation and become the property of the whole people and pass into the use of all those who cultivate it. Persons who suffer by this property revolution shall be deemed to be entitled to public support only for the period necessary for adaptation to the new conditions of life. 2. All mineral wealth, e.g. ore, oil, coal, salt, etc., as well as all forests and waters of state importance, shall pass into the exclusive use of the state. All the small streams, lakes, woods, etc., shall pass into the use of the communities, to be administered by the local self-government bodies. 3. Lands on which high-level scientific farming is practiced, e.g. orchards, plantations, seed plots, nurseries, hothouses, etc., shall not be divided up, but shall be converted into model farms, to be turned over for exclusive use to the state or to the communities, depending on the size and importance of such lands. Household land in towns and villages, with orchards and vegetable gardens, shall be reserved for the use of their present owners, the size of the holdings and the size of the tax levied for the use thereof to be determined by law. 4. Stud farms, government and private pedigree stock and poultry farms, etc., shall be confiscated and become the property of the whole people, to pass into the exclusive use of the state or of the communities, depending on the size and importance of such farms. The question of compensation shall be examined by the Constituent Assembly. 5. All livestock and farm implements of the confiscated estates shall pass into the exclusive use of the state or a community, depending on their size and importance, and no compensation shall be paid for this. The farm implements of peasants with little land shall not be subject to confiscation. 6. The right to use the land shall be accorded to all citizens of the Russian state, without distinction of sex, desiring to cultivate it by their own labor, with the help of their families or in partnership, but only as long as they are able to cultivate it. The employment of hired labor is not permitted. In the event of the temporary physical disability of any member of a village community for a period of up to 2 years, the village community shall be obliged to assist them for this period by collectively cultivating their land until they are again able to work. Peasants who, owing to old age or ill health, are permanently disabled and unable to cultivate the land personally, shall lose their right to the use of it, but in return shall receive a pension from the state. So comment, I think that that's a point with a few things worth highlighting. So the right to use the land was accorded to all citizens of the Russian state, no matter the sex, as long as they could cultivate it with their own labor, or with their family's help, or in partnership with other people, but only as long as they were actually able to do that. They could not just simply hire employees to work it for them. So this is one of the ways that they broke with the old system of doing things. Basically, employment was not allowed. And why does that make sense? Well, previously, the reason that people would have to sell their labor to an employer is that they couldn't afford their own land, and so they would go work for somebody else who could afford to own land, and they would work that person's land for them. But under this new order, everybody could get land as long as you could work it. So if you're going to work it, why would you work for somebody else? Doesn't make sense. Also, if all the land is free to the people, then, obviously if somebody just, the first person to hire 50 people, it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. If everybody has the right to use it, why would anyone work for anyone else? So basically the rule was, as long as you're able to use whatever land it is, you could use it. And even if you got sick or had an injury, for up to 2 years, that plot was basically reserved for you, with the village community having to cultivate it for you. But then if you become permanently disabled, you would lose the right to the land, but you would get a pension instead. Those are pretty great rules, I think. All right, continuing. 7. Land tenure shall be on an equality basis, i.e. the land shall be distributed among the toilers in conformity with a labor standard or a consumption standard, depending on local conditions. There shall be absolutely no restriction on the forms of land tenure, household, farm, communal, or cooperative, as shall be decided in each individual village and settlement. 8. All land, when alienated, shall become part of the National Land Fund. And just commenting, the word alienated, it appears here a few times, means separated from. In other words, becoming alien to, or another synonym here would be expropriated. So all land, when alienated, shall become part of the National Land Fund. Its distribution among the toilers shall be in charge of the local and central self-government bodies, from democratically organized village and city communities, in which there are no distinctions of social rank, to central regional government bodies. The land fund shall be subject to periodical redistribution, depending on the growth of population and the increase in the productivity and the scientific level of farming. When the boundaries of allotments are altered, the original nucleus of the allotment shall be left intact. The land of the members who leave the community shall revert to the land fund. Preferential right to such land shall be given to the near relatives of the members who have left, or to persons designated by the latter. The cost of fertilizers and improvements put into the land, to the extent that they have not been fully used up at the time that an allotment is returned to the land fund, shall be compensated. Should the available land fund in a particular district prove inadequate for the needs of the local population, the surplus population shall be settled elsewhere. The state shall take upon itself the organization of resettlement and shall bear the cost thereof, as well as the cost of supplying implements, etc. Resettlement shall be effected in the following order: landless peasants desiring to resettle, then members of the community who are of vicious habits, deserters, and so on, and finally by lot or by agreement. Not sure exactly which vicious habits they mean, as it's not specified. Anyway, before we get to the conclusion, I just kind of want to recap. This was the longest measure by far out of anything else on the list. So all the land, when it was expropriated, became part of the National Land Fund, and then the job of actually distributing the land to the toilers, the people who would be working it, was in charge of the local and central self-government bodies. Then, periodically, the land fund would be redistributed depending on the growth of the population and changes in productivity and the kinds of farming technology that was being used. And when people left a community, they could designate the land to go to their close family members or other people if they chose to, leave some express wishes on that point. Also, if the land was not adequate for the needs of the population, then the surplus population would be settled somewhere else with the state taking care of all the costs. So, interesting stuff. Finally, the conclusion. The entire contents of this mandate, as expressing the absolute will of the vast majority of the class-conscious peasants of all Russia, are proclaimed a provisional law, which, pending the convocation of the Constituent Assembly, shall be carried into effect as far as possible immediately, and as to certain of its provisions with due gradualness, as shall be determined by the Uyezd Soviets of Peasants' Deputies. So that's the end of the document. The source of this, by the way, is Lenin's Selected Works, Volume 2. That's the Moscow Foreign Language Publishing House 1952 edition. And thanks to Michigan State University, actually, for hosting this file. Normally I get things from Marxists.org, the Marxists Internet Archive. However, I was actually looking for something else, and this popped up, and I just thought it was interesting and fit some of the other readings we were doing, so I went with that. Apparently, Michigan State University has an archive called 17 Moments in Soviet History, an online archive of primary sources, and so they have kind of a collection set up there. Anyway, that was the Decree on the Land from November 8, 1917, right after the Socialist Revolution in Russia. What do you think? Leave questions or comments below in the comment section. We'll continue the discussion there as always. I always find those interesting, educational, and sometimes they lead to the creation of entire other videos or even video series. So I do look forward to reading those. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month or more. Every donation is encouraging. They're also materially helpful, and the amount of support has allowed me to do a lot more videos than I would have been able to do otherwise. So really, I appreciate it a lot, as do, I'm sure, the other listeners who cannot afford to make a contribution. If you would like to help out without making a financial contribution, liking, sharing, subscribing, and leaving a comment, even if it's just thanks or good video, all of that helps to boost the channel in the YouTube algorithm, to put the video in front of new eyes, to expand the audience, and to expand this conversation about ending capitalism and building socialism, because we need to do it. It is the historic task of the working class to do this. We all know capitalism is well past its sell-by date. It needs to be abolished, and nobody's going to do that but us, so let's get on that. Speaking of, back in the real world, join an organization. All the agitation and education in the world is only going to get you so far. We have to get organized as well. Until next time, thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next video.